Good morning again. My name is Ismail Isifu, and I'm part of the Division for Inclusive Social Development at the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, UNDESA. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar titled Poor Places in Poor Countries, Why They Matter, How They Can Renew Themselves, and How the United Nations Can Help. This webinar is part of a broader series of expert discussion convened by UNDESA to inform the preparation of the World Social Report, one of the department's flagship publications. Today's discussion addresses an issue that lies at the heart of both social inclusion and sustainable development: the persistent disadvantage faced by marginalized communities and neglected regions. Our discussion is inspired by Professor Collier's recent book, Left Behind: A New Economics for Neglected Places, which challenges conventional economic thinking and offers a compelling framework for understanding why some places prosper while others fall behind. It is a privilege to welcome Sir Paul Collier, Professor of Economics and Public Policy at Blavatnik School of Government at the University of Oxford. This is certainly not the occasion to do justice to Professor Collier's extensive contribution to development economics. Let me simply say that for many years, he has kept thousands of PhD students and researchers around the world, including myself, engage in trying to solve some of the field's most challenging puzzles. One of those is the natural resources trap, often referred to as the resource curse, for which he provided one of the most influential explanations in his landmark 2007 book, The Bottom Million: Why the Poorest Countries Are Failing and What Can Be Done About It. His research has consistently challenged conventional wisdom and helped shape policy debates around the world. Today, Professor Collier continues that tradition by focusing our attention on places that have been left behind, not only in developing countries, but also in rich countries, and by asking what can be done to restore hope, opportunity, and economic dynamism for those communities. Before inviting Professor Collier to deliver his presentation, it is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Navid Hanif, Assistant Secretary General for Economic Development at UNDESA, who will provide opening remarks. Mr. Hanif, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ismail, and thank you, Professor Collier, for joining us this morning. And as I mentioned, we did have the chance to meet when you presented the bottom billion at the UN a long time ago. So it's a pleasure to welcome you to this conversation. And your work, as Ismail mentioned, has fundamentally made us rethink about development, inequality, and the forces that determine who advances and who's left behind. And your latest book, Left Behind, offers a powerful proposition that development is not only about income levels, it is about geography, where people live, increasingly shapes their opportunities, their aspirations, and their sense of belonging. So this is an observation which comes through empirical evidence also, but you have given us a rigorous analytical framework for that. So I want to frame today's discussions around three questions, which you have also addressed in your book, aside from the last one. So my first question is, why do places fall behind? How do they renew themselves? And what institutions like the United Nations do to support that renewal? So the experience of places such as South Yorkshire, Detroit, and Barranquilla reveals a common pattern. When a place loses its economic purpose, the consequences go beyond lost jobs and lower incomes. It can lose confidence, identity, and influence. The most worrying feature is that decline often becomes self reinforcing. As Professor Collier has written, talented people leave first, institutions weaken, investment becomes harder to attract, confidence erodes, and the cycle accelerates. So, economic decline becomes a social experience of abandonment. And that sense of being left behind can fuel distrust, polarization, and political instability. And we're also witnessing social fragmentation. So, the second question is how such places renew themselves. And here I think the answer is not simply more policy from above. Renewal begins when places recognize that their challenges are not their destiny. Successful transformations often start by identifying hidden strengths and turning perceived disadvantages into sources of renewal. And transformation does not come from waiting for weaknesses to disappear, but from discovering and investing in distinctive capabilities. And we have some examples. Naples, once widely associated with decline, has used culture, tourism, and civic identity as foundations for renewal. The cooperative movement in the Basque region of Spain demonstrates how locally rooted institutions can build resilience. And the European Union's cohesion policy shows that well designed external support can help shift trajectories, with Poland's convergence toward EU income levels being a notable example. Now, let me come to the third question. What can the UN do and what should the UN do? First, we must make localization real. The Sustainable Development Goals will only succeed if communities have ownership, reliable data, and authority to shape their own development pathways. Local governments are not simply implementing partners, they are engines of transformation. And I sense whatever discussions we'll have on Beyond 2030, localization of SDGs will become a central piece. Second, we must move from fragmented interventions to place based transformation. And that's a shift the UN needs to pursue. The UN can help create platforms that bring together local governments, communities, investors, development institutions, universities, and civil society around shared pathways for renewal. We can support countries in diagnosing territorial challenges, identifying local capabilities, building investment pipelines, and strengthening institutions that enable communities to shape their own futures. We have witnessed the challenge is often not a lack of ideas or resources, it is the absence of connections, capacities, and systems needed to turn potential into progress. Third, as UN, we must strengthen partnerships. The UN's greatest competitive advantage is its ability to convene, connecting actors who do not naturally work together and creating bridges across borders. A local government in one region can learn from another. Diaspora networks can become sources of investment and innovation. South South and triangular cooperation can help transfer solutions adapted to local realities. Finally, we must improve how we measure progress. If we measure only national averages, we risk hiding the inequalities within countries. And I want to highlight The work of the Secretary General's high-level working group on beyond GDP points towards a broader measurement agenda, one that captures well-being, resilience, and disparities across regions. So, colleagues, the challenge of leaving no one behind is ultimately a challenge of place. It requires moving from managing equality to transforming the system that cause it, that produce it. And I'm confident today's conversation will enrich our thinking and inform our collective efforts in our forthcoming World Social reports this year and next year to contribute to the wider UN agenda on reducing inequalities and leaving no one behind. Thank you once again, Professor Collier, for joining us today, and I hand over the floor back to Ismail for conducting the conversation. Over to you, Ismail.
Thank you very much, ASJ Navid, for those insightful opening remarks. So you highlighted the self-reinforcing dynamics that can leave place behind, the need for those communities to invest in their distinct abilities to renew themselves, and the critical role that the United Nations can play by recognizing local government as the primary engine of transformation. We are now honored to hear from Professor Paul Collier. You have approximately 25 to 30 minutes for your presentation. Professor Collier, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. And first, Naveed, I would just like to congratulate you on a beautifully coherent presentation of Left Behind. I think it's about the clearest I've ever heard. It will be far clearer than what I managed to say. So I'll do my best. I think I want to start with a practical example of talking to a collection. This is something I did about 6 weeks ago. So it's later than the book, so it's not in the book. But I was invited to address 1,300 mayors and chief executives of poor regions in Poland, and I was asked to do the opening keynote, which was quite scary. I will give you one example of the mayor of a poor region, which was Silesia. And he said, we've got a really big problem. We've been a coal mining region. And of course, in line with all the UN goals and everything, we're having to phase coal out. And so we've got a huge problem in the Silesia region. We've got a lot of young, redundant coal miners. That's one terrible problem. What on earth do we do about it? Now, I give that as an example because in a lot of poor countries, coal will gradually have to be phased out. Well, maybe not yet, but it will happen. And so what I started by saying was try, first of all, to stop looking at the prospect of redundant young coal miners as a problem. Think of it as an opportunity and an asset. Poland is a very centralized country. As a country, as Navid said, it's doing very well. It's catching up very fast. It's right up there now. I think in about 3 years, it's due to overtake my own country of Britain in per capita income. Nationally, it's very successful, but it's very concentrated. Everything happens in Warsaw. It's over-centralized in Warsaw. Warsaw is the booming city, the booming capital city, and Silesia is an angry, frustrated, and resentful region. Now, the government of Poland set up this conference for mayors from left behind places, mayors and chief executives, starting only in 2022. So it's only been going 5 or 6 years. And the reason that the government set it up was because it saw that having a resentful, angry region was a political problem. It was a cause of unrest and instability, exactly as Navid said. And so it wanted me to come in to address these mayors to see what could they do for themselves. As it was, they were just going cap in hand to the government saying, "Give us money," and the government didn't have enough money to give everybody, and that sort of buying off, they decided was not the right way to go. So they wanted me to come in and give them ideas, and I started with this challenge: what do we do with redundant young coal miners? So I started by saying, so let's try and think of the characteristics of young coal miners. Do we know anything about them at all? Are they, for example, as strong as I am, weaker than I am, or even stronger than I am? Oh, they said, oh, no, young coal miners are very, very strong. Okay, let's tick one, right? Next one, do you know anything else about coal miners? Are they as individualistic and secretive as academics, as we desperately try and keep our potential discoveries to ourselves? Or are they cooperative? Oh, well, of course, coal miners are very good at working in a team, because once you go down a mine, it's bloody dangerous, and so you all have to cooperate. So, oh, okay, so we've got people who are very strong, very good at cooperating in a team. Are they as brave as I am? Oh, they're braver than you are. Yes, right. So we've got strong, brave people, young people used to working in a team, and you can't think of anything that they could do except dig coal out of the ground. Let's try and think if there's anything else they could do at all. Could they, for example, dig something else out of the ground? Do you know what is under the ground in Silesia? Do you know that the new technologies for discovering what's under the ground are now quite cheap? You can get a lot of information just by flying planes overhead at very low altitude. Have you done a recent geological survey for Silesia? No, they haven't. I said, if you by chance you've got slate, slate's very rare in Europe and very valuable. If you've got slate, just get these guys to dig the slate out of the ground and you're home and dry. But quite apart from digging other things out of the ground, is there any other activity that brave, strong, cooperative people could do? And by this time, there was 1,300 people in the audience, and they started to get the hang of this. And it was quite fun. So the audience was shouting out things that these guys could do. For example, it's not so very different being a coal miner to being a construction worker. And so is there a need for construction workers in Poland? Oh, yes, plenty of need for construction workers. So that was, and immediately we started to have this cascade of ideas where you've got to start, I explained, you've got to see this as a big advantage. Eat your heart out, Warsaw. You haven't got brave, team-working, strong young people coming on your job market. Right? So that was the example. And then we got similar examples. I got absolutely mobbed once I'd finished and we was open to people talking. Most especially, I was mobbed by young people, often in tears, because they were young people in poor regions. And they said, "You're the first person who's actually come here and given us hope for a future instead of just problems." Um, there were lots of examples. I'll give you one more of a place where the chief executive said, "Oh, our region is just full of forests. What on earth are we going to do with, we've got very few people and loads of trees. That's a real problem. What on earth can we do with loads of trees?" Well, there's lots of things you can do with trees. Yes, of course, you can develop logging. If you're like Indonesia, not only do you log, but you develop a plywood industry on the back of it. And Indonesia made a great success of that. What else can you do apart from, so the Indonesians managed to get IKEA to come in and make knock down furniture kits. So you've got the whole chain from trees to an export industry. A lot of value added. But right about 5 miles from where I'm speaking from now in northern Brittany, there's a family firm which every year for the last 40 years has tried to innovate and introduce new things on the family enterprise. They've got an old building, which is an old mill, and a little bowl of land with a stream and that sort of thing, and a lot of trees. So every year for 40 years, this family has said, as a rule of our family policy, we will introduce a new idea. We'll try some new innovation. Often they don't work. But after 42 years, they introduced their most successful innovation they've ever had. And it was using their tall trees. They hung up netting, a great web of nets, high up in the trees, and great expansive netting where young people could go up, bounce on these nets, and play volleyball and basketball and all sorts of things high up in the trees. And it turned into a huge success. I said, if you've got a lot of trees in your area, and you're short of people, well, try that. It can bring in a tourist industry. So all these things are ways of looking at your characteristics with a new eyes. So let me turn to how you help left behind places themselves to catalyze change. And this is, I think, where I come round to say, well, what can the UN, what can DESA do? And I co-direct a little organization called the International Growth Centre, which you won't have heard of, but it's funded by the British Foreign Office. And we're a field organization, very much like UN. And we work in partnership with governments. We don't bring in money. We've got no money. All we've got is a network of a couple of hundred very clever academics. And we say, well, you tell us what you want. You tell us the problems, the policy problems you've got. And we will then try and bring in some outside experts, some academic experts. We'll try and find one or two of the top 10 people in the world in our network. And then we'll pay for their flight or their costs of going to see you. We don't pay them a wage. They have to be inspired enough to say, yes, it's worth coming to help these poor governments, poor places. And so we filter out the people who are only motivated by, I want to write my next book. The people we have learned to stick with us are academics who are willing to help, willing to advise. And that's, I think, what DESA can do. In fact, Navid very much suggested that it's bringing in expertise, it's the platforms, it's the partnering with others, all the things that he suggested. These are right, I think, absolutely right. And that's what I've been doing through this organization for many years. We are welcomed precisely because we're not bringing money. We're not bringing money with threats. There are some other international organizations which, out of courtesy, I won't name because they're still in the sort of UN system, the world something or other and the international something or other. They believe they've got lots of expertise and they've got lots of money. And what they are good at doing is conditionality, saying, well, you've got to take our advice and we'll give you some money if you take the advice. Conditionality. You recognize the disease. Well, it's less and less and less welcome because a lot of governments in Africa and Asia are realizing that these guys are not the most expert people in the world. There is often, it's better to get independent academic expertise rather than swallow the pill of often not very good advice from these so-called experts. They say, well, did China take all this money with conditionality? No, it seems to be doing all right. And so I work quite a bit with Malaysia, and Malaysia is famous for having not adopted International Monetary Fund advice. But it actually came out better than if it had. So your strength is not your money. Everybody knows that you've faced severe budget cuts. Turn that knowledge from a weakness, we can't bring you a lot of money, into a strength. Instead of bringing you a lot of money and threats and conditionality, we will bring you some expertise. We'll find expertise for you and we'll bring it in. So that's the essence, I think, of what you need to do. How do you catalyze change? And that's the objective I want to suggest. When I work in these poor places, I always try and tell them, you are going to be the ones who solve your problems. I told the districts and mayors in Poland, you know so much more about your region, your country than I do, that I'm not going to tell you how to run your place. What I'm going to do is give you examples from what has worked elsewhere. Whether you decide it's something that you can do, that's up to you. I'll explain the context in which it worked, or the contexts in which it worked. So all the things I'm going to suggest are things that have worked in real places. It's not a load of theory, they really worked. And I'll just give you all these examples, all the details, and then if you want to learn more from me, you can talk to me whilst I'm at this conference, you can email me, and that's exactly what happened. Exactly what happened. it even happened, and this is a silly example, but it's an extraordinary example. I live in Oxford most of the year, and in my street in Oxford, there's one guy who, over the last 7 years, has put together a network of high net worth individuals who live around Oxfordshire. Oxfordshire is a pretty rich county, and so he's found 600 high net worth individuals who go on a Zoom for 10 months a year. What do they do in that Zoom? Well, startups, little firms that want to launch a business make a pitch. And so in each Zoom, lasting about an hour and a half, there are 10 pitches. So 10 pitches every month for 10 months of the year, 100 pitches a year to these 600 people, high net worth individuals, who then can decide, oh, I'll support that one. That sounds promising. Well, I'll support that one. So they're financing startups. That's what it's about. It's financing startups. Now, Britain is actually quite a good environment for financing startups, hence that example. I was recently in Hamburg, huge rich city in Germany. Germany is very short of startups, as are a lot of poor countries. If you look at almost any poor country, and it's desperately short of firms of the future. Firms of the future will bring jobs of the future and prosperity, but they're very short of them. So the mayor of Hamburg said, my God, why hasn't anybody in Germany told me of this idea? Because we in Germany are terribly short of startups. We've got long established old firms, but we're not creating any new ones. Hamburg is a much bigger city than Oxford, is much richer. I can easily get not 600 high net worth individuals, I can get 6,000 with no trouble at all. And I can tell them, by supporting the startups that are pitched in Hamburg, you will be supporting your place. It will help Hamburg develop the jobs of the future, the firms of the future, and the skills of the future. And so the mayor of Hamburg says, you wait, I'm going to invite you back to Hamburg to see that idea put into practice. So that's a trivial example of a good idea, which Germany, very short of firms, new firms, desperately needs. All the poor countries that I work in most of the time, in Africa, in Latin America, in South Asia, they need innovative new firms. And there's the ideas that can create them. So I'm going to draw to a close, but I think, as I said, you can turn your weakness of not having a lot of money into a strength by saying, we're not in the business of stuffing our own ideas down an unwilling throat and saying, here's some money. We're in the business of connecting you with ideas and expertise that really can transform your souls. That catalysis doesn't take that long, because remember, our objective is that they will own their problem, they will come together and start to fix it. And that's the core process. The first steps of coming together are the hardest. And that's why you've got a big role of catalyzing demoralized, left behind communities and say, here's the examples of other communities that have turned themselves round already, and you can have that agency in your own hands. Just to remind you, the governments themselves welcome it very often because the poorest regions are disruptive and expensive for the central government. Maybe I'll close with one example, one further example. I'm going to take, I think I'll take Rwanda, but I could have taken Ethiopia, which is a larger and more dramatic case. But Rwanda was interesting because it's overpopulated. It's got this terrible history of genocide, and it's extremely landlocked. And so I worked a bit with the government, and they said we've got a terrible problem, which is that we're based in Kigali, the capital, and we're basically an ethnic minority government, the Tutsi government. The majority of people are Hutus, and unless we bring opportunity everywhere in Uganda, everywhere in Rwanda, not just in Kigali, the Hutu will see us as selfish and greedy and just helping the place where we ourselves are based. And they said, we're going to start with thinking about healthcare. We want to have good healthcare anywhere in Rwanda, always within reach of, so a little town within reach of wherever you live, not just come to Kigali. And the vital medical procedure that they were worried about was giving birth. Not surprising. Rwanda, like the rest of Africa, has a high birth rate, so a lot of women are giving birth. And do you have to go to Kigali to have a safe birth? Or can you have a safe birth anywhere in Rwanda? And the crucial thing then was if you have a birth that develops problems, you need on-site fresh blood. So how can you get fresh blood distributed right across Rwanda? And so the Ministry of Finance looked at it and realized there seemed to be only one technology. You needed to get a refrigerated Land Rover and put blood in the refrigerated Land Rover and drive it all across Rwanda. Rwanda is a country of 1,000 hills, and so it's a very upsy-downsy process. And they costed that, and they realized it was prohibitively expensive. They couldn't do it. They couldn't do it. And so they thought, we have to think out of the box. We have to think, how in Rwanda, is there any technology we can use to deliver blood to poor places all around Rwanda without having to have a refrigerated Land Rover? Now, many years ago, I was head of the research department of the World Bank, and there was a whole division devoted to health, and we had some very clever people in it. But none of them came up with the answer to this problem. What is the right technology for delivering blood? Does anybody here know what they hit on? It's very simple, very ingenious. And they weren't the first to discover it. Amazon was already delivering parcels this way by drone. Right? But Amazon was busy delivering parcels, and it never thought, oh, we could help poor countries deliver blood this way, it wasn't in Amazon's cultural repertoire, right? We know that the Pentagon also hit on the idea of drones. It was delivering drones to kill people. And again, it was too far outside the frame to think, well, you can actually save people's lives by delivering blood. And so the Rwandans worked that out for themselves, and they delivered blood by drone. And then that idea spread across Africa. I worked a lot with the government of Ghana, and I knew the vice president, who'd been my former student, very clever man. And he proudly told me, he said, we in Ghana are now delivering more blood by drone than the Rwandans are. He'd copied them. And that is the network effect of learning from each other. Once you've catalyzed something, it will spread. On that note, let me hand back to Ismail, and I'm very happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Collier, for sharing some concrete example in terms of development and why we should rely on local initiative. And maybe before collecting some question, maybe this echoes one of the central concepts in your book, which is the contributive justice developed by Michael Sandel. So maybe I was wondering if you can elaborate a little bit on that. Why do you see contributive justice as a more effective framework for addressing the challenges of left behind places, and how it can restore agency, dignity, and also the opportunity in communities that have been left behind?
Thanks very much. And that's a very good nudge to me to get on with, with including that. I work with Michael Sandel very closely. He's been to see me in Oxford twice in the last 3 months, and we, as I say, we work together. And his concept of contributive justice, he's just become got the equivalent of the Nobel Prize for Humanities this year, the Berggruen Prize. And so contributive justice is the idea that everybody should have the dignity of having equality of voice, so that they can say what common purposes they would like to have. Equality of respect, so their voice is listened to, whether they're rich or poor. And finally, they should be in a material position, being paid well enough that they can afford to contribute materially to common purposes. So those are the 3 conditions. And where those 3 conditions are met, Michael Sandel says, then, but only then, is there a reasonable case for saying you have a duty to contribute to common purposes. You've had a voice in shaping them, your voice has been listened to respectfully, and you're materially sufficiently well paid that you can afford to contribute. And I think that's really inspiring. It's, instead of this individualism, we're moving to a more collective common vision of coming together around agreed common purposes. That's what contributive justice means. It's contrasted with purely distributive justice, which was the old concept of John Rawls, where distributive justice was saying, well, the rich have a duty to give to the poor, but saying the rich have a duty to give to the poor leaves agency with the rich. They are the ones who are giving them money. And the poor, what are their role? Just to say thank you? It doesn't give the poor agency, whereas in Michael Sandel's formulation, the poor have the agency. They're not the only ones to have the agency, but it's a collective group. And so that's why I'm a passionate adherent of that. I think it's a very, very good principle.
Thank you very much. So we have another question for one participant asking, the renewal capacity of localities may require more private sector investment, especially to provide innovative ideas. Are there concrete examples of inclusive local development led by private investment?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, but also you can do it. You can do it with cooperative investment, cooperative stuff. In Basque Spain, one priest, Father Jose, trained local people to set up businesses, but the businesses had to be run as cooperative businesses, so common ownership. Profits reinvested in the community. That was one priest. And decades later, that whole organization has grown into something called Mondragon, which has 90,000 employees. And in the process of, it's one of the biggest organizations in Spain. Still, the chief executive is paid a very modest wage, only 5 times more than the lowest paid person in the organization. So not the sort of 500 to 1 that you get in a lot of American private sector, 5 to 1. So you can do it through cooperatives. Mondragon's been a huge success in Basque Spain, but you can also do it through private sector, yes. And there are plenty of examples of well-run private sector firms that have a social conscience. In fact, my partner in a lot of this work, Sir John Kay, points out that nearly all the American businesses that have lasted for a century, so all the businesses that have endured, like Johnson & Johnson in America, Unilever in Europe, they've all been pro-social businesses. And so, yes, they're there to make money, but they're not just there to make money. The Johnson & Johnson model was fascinating because the founder of Johnson & Johnson put up what he called the credo, which was to say, our purpose as a company is to improve people's health. That's what we're there to do. And so, yes, we're going to, if we do it well enough, people will buy our products. But our purpose is to, and all of us, no matter whether you're the chief executive like me or a young person just starting in the organization, we want you to realize that your core purpose is to help people to be healthy. And if you see an opportunity to do that, you don't have to ask permission to the chief executive, you go and do it. This became a famous example because at one stage, some criminals in America put poison into some of the tablets, some of the bottles of pills that Johnson & Johnson was selling. So instead of it being a bottle of healthy pills, it was a bottle of poison. And they said, we'll only tell you, Johnson & Johnson, which shops have got these poison pills if you pay us $10 million or whatever it was. And straight away, what happened was remarkable because straight away, the Johnson & Johnson staff went into the shops and removed all the bottles of those pills, whether they were Nobody knew was this poison or not. Maybe only one bottle in 1,000 was poisoned, but they removed all of them. Yeah? Now, that was at the time heavily criticized by lawyers who said, under American law, um, uh, Johnson & Johnson has no legal liability to do this, and so you've wasted money. It turned out to be a huge success because, of course, people that increased people's trust in Johnson & Johnson. So actually, by the end of the year, Johnson & Johnson profits had gone up, not down, because it had acquired a reputation for we can really trust Johnson & Johnson. So that was then, this is now. We've still got some brutally greedy corporations. I don't name them, but it doesn't have to be like that. They will end up not surviving because their philosophy is ghastly. I can, I think, name Purdue Pharmaceuticals because the whole outfit went bankrupt. It had developed a model of making money by incentivizing doctors to prescribe its painkillers, which were very effective painkillers, but unfortunately, they were about 100 times more addictive than heroin. And so you should only be giving these effective painkillers to people who were dying. And Purdue Pharmaceutical decided this was an unfortunate business model because no sooner had they persuaded people to take the pill than they died. And so they persuaded doctors to prescribe the pill even for people who just got an ache or a pain here or there, not dying. And they became addicted. As in, again, addicted like in heroin. That was shameful. And eventually, Purdue Pharma went bankrupt, but not before the Sackler family, which owned it, had extracted $10 billion in profits, which it still got. Bless them.
Thank you so much, Professor. So maybe another question, what advice can we provide lagging regions where political support from the central government is lacking? Many of these regions are lagging because of specific policy choices from national governments, and they are often fighting against the tide. So if you allow me, considering that you have a few minutes, I can add also another question from participant. So you have also argued for development bottom-up agency, but geopolitical fragmentation is driving national government to centralize control over industrial policy and critical supply chains in the name of national security. How can left behind places effectively exercise local agency when macroeconomic investments are increasingly dictated by top-down geopolitical strategies?
Yes, I think these are powerful questions, and of course, the whole United Nations philosophy is it's in the end you're dealing with nations, so it's difficult for you to bypass the government of the nation. And to be honest, although I wouldn't recommend it because I think it undermines trust in the government becomes suspicious of you, and that's a weakness. So, but I think what you can do is gently demonstrate to these highly centralized places that actually they're places that have become more successful than them, and that the way they've done it is by devolving, and the devolving brings huge benefits to the central government. About the most centralized country in the world is my own, Britain, and you might just have followed enough news to show that the current Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has just been ousted and is being replaced by a communitarian localist, Andy Burnham, who's being greeted with huge sighs of relief and welcome. So Britain is moving from a wildly, ridiculously centralized system under a failed prime minister who failed very within 20 months of coming to power. He's been thrown out humiliatingly, but quite justifiably, and we've replaced him with somebody who is exactly the regional cooperation sort of prime minister that is consistent with Left Behind. So just give them that example and say, if you fear being ousted, don't do what Starmer did, devolve power in advance of a coup or a threat.
Thank you very much, Professor. Maybe one last question, which maybe also spoke to one of your chapter about leadership. So one participant asked, from my modest experience, change occurs when there is effective leadership. My main question is whether leader can be made. If the answer is yes, what are the most effective ways to develop them?
Yeah, that's a good question. So how was Andy Burnham made? Andy Burnham had been a so-so minister in a previous government, but he's now become a very good, I think he's going to be a very good prime minister. How did he learn? He learned on the job. He was the mayor of a region. He was the mayor of the Greater Manchester region. And by facing the problems of locality, that's how he learned. The strength of Germany is that all its leaders have emerged first by running regions. And because those who successfully run a region learn on the job, and then they get elected. So yes, good leadership can be made, but it's made by getting experience of doing the job at a more local level and then gradually rising.
Professor Collier, thank you very much for your time. Thank you all colleagues for participating. We hope you had a very great moment with Professor Collier. So this will be the end of our webinar. I wish also to thank ASG Navid for his opening remarks. Thank you very much and see you shortly. Bye-bye.
Thank you.